Throughout history, many have claimed to have the gift. Nostradamus, whose cryptic messages predicted events far beyond the 16th century. Abraham Lincoln, the great American president, plagued by visions of his own assassination. Adolf Hitler, whose clairvoyance led him into untold madness and evil. From shamans and holy men to self-proclaimed seers whose disturbing predictions are too startling to ignore.
And even if you're right, it's a horrible thing. I mean, if you're right and you predict, oh gee, terrorists are going to attack New York and thousands of people are going to die.
Scientists, psychiatrists, even the military are studying the possibility of seeing tomorrow, now. Welcome to the mysterious world of prophets, seers of the future. The great day of the Lord is very near and coming fast. It will be a day of fury, a day of ruin and destruction, a day filled with the sound of war trumpets and the battle cry of soldiers attacking fortified cities in high towers. According to a recent Time magazine news poll, nearly 25% of Americans believe the Bible prophesied the events of September 11, 2001. And nearly 60% accept the book of Revelations as a guide for what's to come.
The events of 9/11 had what I would call a major stage setting effect or stage setting impact for the prophecies of the end time to be fulfilled.
The end time. A period foretold in the Bible where plague, natural disaster, and ruinous world war are all harbingers of Armageddon and the second coming of Christ.
We're absolutely in the general time of the return of Christ for the church.
The whole of earth will be destroyed by the fire of his anger. He will put an end, a sudden end, to everyone who lives on earth.
I've been studying prophecy 47 years, and that same scenario I saw at the beginning, I've seen it all completed now. I mean, all of these signs that the prophet said to look for are all before us right now.
Christian book conventions all over America feature stunning testimony of the popularity of end-time prophecies.
I think with all of the events that have been happening in our world, there's just a lot of fear about the future, and I think that's just fueling a lot of interest in Bible prophecy and in the end times.
One series has sold over 50 million copies worldwide. But Christianity is not the only religion in which prophecy plays an important role. It's integral to Islam, Buddhism, Mormonism, and many other belief systems. Skeptics of all this prediction and prophecy abound. They question claims that are often cryptic or vague, frequently debunked, and virtually impossible to verify.
If prophets were held to the same standard that we hold the weatherman, for example, everyone would laugh at prophets. They laugh at the weatherman, and he's generally a lot more accurate than most prophets.
Despite the skeptics, tens of millions of Americans and countless others around the world are open to the possibility that some individuals can see the future.
All throughout history, we have incidences where some kind of occurrence happens to someone. They get an intuition, they have a vision, they have a dream, they encounter a psychic or a prophet, and it changes the course of history in very unusual ways.
Abraham Lincoln, 16th President of the United States, presided during the tumultuous years of the American Civil War. According to historians, Lincoln openly discussed what he considered premonitions with his wife Mary and close friends. Shortly after his election in 1860, one of those visions reportedly left Lincoln shaken and troubled. As he peered into the mirror, a second image of his face appeared, this one pale and ghostly. Lincoln interpreted the dual images as a prophecy that he would have a healthy first term in office, followed by a second term in which he would die.
Lincoln made a number of remarks along the way that indicated a certain dread, that indicated something might happen to him.
5 years later, Lincoln experienced a vivid dream in which he saw mourners grieving around his corpse.
In the dream, he was asleep, and then he was awakened by the sound of sobbing, and he followed the sound of the sobs through the White House. It was dark and empty until he came into a room, and suddenly an honor guard appeared, and there was a large coffin on display. Somebody important had died. And Lincoln said to one of the guards, "Who has died?" And the guard said, "The president." And so he seems to have dreamed his own death.
10 days later, on April 14, 1865, after revealing his dark premonitions to his cabinet, Abraham Lincoln was fatally wounded by an assassin's bullet. But was it prophecy, or merely the brooding of a conflicted man caught in violent times?
Some of those quotations are fairly ambiguous and can be taken as just a sense of dread. You're in the middle of a war, and that's enough to produce a certain amount of anxiety in anyone.
Lincoln, who helped America survive a divisive civil war, would seem the polar opposite of Adolf Hitler, who led Germany to near destruction in World War II. Yet the two leaders shared a common trait, a powerful belief in their visions of the future. In 1915, during the First World War, Hitler was a young corporal fighting on the Western Front. Combat was reduced to trench warfare, and soldiers spent weeks in the trenches. It was here that some historians say a brief flash of clairvoyance would alter the course of his life.
He was sitting with his buddies in a trench, and they were eating a dinner, and suddenly an inner voice told him to get up and move. Move now, said the voice. And he did. He moved about 20 yards down the trench. And just after he did that, an enemy shell came whizzing into the trench and exploded right where he'd been sitting, and everyone there was killed. And of course, if he hadn't moved, he would have been blown to bits. Hitler understood this to mean that he had a special destiny. He claimed that several times in life, Providence had spoken directly to him in this way, and that he was being saved for a special purpose.
Whether by intuition or sheer luck, Hitler went on to survive other brushes with death, including several assassination attempts, events that only reinforced his belief in his divine mission. While some visions can clearly lead to madness and evil, a growing number of believers insist that clairvoyance can be used for self-awareness, enlightenment, and emotional health.
We have so distanced ourselves from the great art of dreaming, the great art of intuition, and the ancients revered it.
Psychiatrist Judith Orloff, a faculty member at the UCLA School of Medicine, claims to have integrated her gift of prophecy into a traditional psychiatric practice. She recalls receiving her first premonition as a young girl when her grandfather visited her in a dream.
He said, "I love you. I just wanted to tell you this, that I'll always be with you, but I'm going to die." And I ran into my parents' room. I'll never forget the look on my mother's face. She just smiled at me and said, "Oh, no, dear, you're just having a nightmare, that's all." And in the morning, my aunt called to let us know that my grandfather had suddenly died.
It was the first of many prophetic dreams that Orloff claims she experienced as she grew older.
I would predict deaths. I would predict divorces. I remember I would have dreams right before an earthquake would hit in Los Angeles. Words come through in dreams. It doesn't have to be exactly the same word.
Today in private practice, Orloff uses her gift to help her patients. But as a young doctor, she resisted her visions until one day, while treating a depressed woman, she says her visions warned her about something traditional medicine could never predict.
I remember looking outside, and I drifted off into a trance state. And in that trance state, I had absolutely clear premonition that she was going to make a suicide attempt. It It had nothing to do with how she presented clinically. And because it made no sense, I didn't even bring it up.
Within weeks, Orloff's patient tried to kill herself. For Orloff, it was a clear wake-up call.
I knew as a responsible physician that somehow I had to bring my dreams and my premonitions back into my medical practice because I felt that by not listening to her, I had harmed her. And this I could not live with.
What's probably happening with Judith is she's remembering the hits and forgetting the misses. All the time she's had dreams or that are somehow affiliated with real-life experiences. We all have that. But in science, we have to record both the hits and the misses and ask, is there anything unusual about that affiliation, or is it due to chance?
When we return, prophets of doom and darkness forecasting catastrophic disaster.
There will be let loose living deadly fire, hidden in horrible, terrifying globes. By night, the hostile forces shall shoot against the city. The city shall be on fire.
Some say this prediction, made over 400 years ago by the mystic Nostradamus, envisioned modern techniques of destruction, first used in World War II. Indeed, throughout the ages, prophecies have more often than not conjured up dark images, dire warnings of death and destruction on a massive scale.
Gloom and doom sells. People don't want to hear about a rosy future as much as they like to hear about a doom and gloom future in which there's going to be disasters. Just look at the news.
Among history's many prophets of doom, none is more widely cited or debated than Nostradamus.
People are still studying Nostradamus today because of his incredible accuracy in predicting future events.
A prominent physician in 16th century France, Nostradamus became widely known as a self-styled visionary, astrologer, and time traveler. Among the countless events he's given credit for predicting are the Great London Fire of 1666, the stock market crash of 1929, and numerous major earthquakes.
He would go up into a tower at night, he'd quiet himself, he had a little pool of bowl with a little water in it, he'd put it on a tripod, he'd sit there and stare into there, and he would have visual images.
In order to protect himself from the persecution of the dreaded Inquisition, Nostradamus recorded his premonitions in cryptic code. He divided them into centuries, far into the future. From 1555 to 1559, he composed 1,000 quatrains in a complex language comprised of Latin, French, and mysterious anagrams. He deliberately disguised the chronology, making it difficult to interpret with precision.
The great men will be struck down in the day by a thunderbolt. From the roof, evil ruin will fall. They will accuse an innocent, being dead, of the deed.
Some of the most famous quatrains are said to foretell the assassination of President John F. Kennedy. And another, the challenge of defeating Adolf Hitler.
Beast, wild with hunger, will cross the rivers. The greater part of the battlefield will be against Hister.
Writing in 1555, he talked about a leader arising out of Germany, and he named him Hister, H-I-S-T-E-R, one letter off.
Whenever a great leader is fallen, people immediately look to Nostradamus. A lot of people are apparently willing to make the jump to say, oh, he must have really meant Hitler instead of Hister. But the fact is, if you start changing words and spelling and sentences, you can make Nostradamus say anything.
Despite his fear of church inquisitors, the ambitious Nostradamus cultivated a public image as a gifted psychic. As his notoriety grew, he gained favor with Queen Catherine de' Medicis, wife of King Henry II of France. According to legend, Nostradamus predicted the king's death exactly as it later played out in real life.
The young lion shall overcome the old on a field of war in a single combat. He will pierce his eyes in a cage of gold. This is the first of 2 loppings. Then he dies a cruel death.
When King Henry was killed in a jousting tournament by a young opponent, who pierced Henry's armored visor with his lance, it was seen as evidence of Nostradamus' ability to see the future. Today, under scrutiny, much of the Nostradamus legend seems questionable, including his prediction of the appearance of an Antichrist at the end of the millennium.
In the year 1999 and 7 months, the great king of terror will come from the sky.
Of course, the year 2000 has gone. And when you go back and look, you realize that if this is what Nostradamus predicted about us, he just missed it completely.
The best prophet is someone who is never right, because people listen to what that person has to say and manage to alter a timeline or alter the future in such a way so that that prophecy does not come to pass.
Sean David Morton is not only a great believer in the ancient prophets, but a self-proclaimed seer in his own right.
Nostradamus, we're still talking about him 500 years later. There have been other people who have put me in that class, who have compared me to that.
Born in 1958, Morton grew up in Los Angeles, where his father worked in the aerospace industry. As a boy, he became acquainted with several astronauts and was especially close to Gus Grissom, a member of the famed Mercury 7 space explorers. It was at this time that Morton claims he began to see the future.
I started having these horrible dreams about Gus's death, and started dreaming about literally being trapped inside like a coffin and trying to claw my way out and being burned alive. And when Gus would leave the house, I would just yell and scream and cry and grab onto his leg and keep him from trying to leave.
Morton's dreams foretold the most tragic accident of the Apollo space program.
Apollo astronauts Roger Chaffee, Edward White, and Gus Grissom lose their lives in a tragic flash fire aboard their grounded space capsule. The tragedy.
And so that was probably one of my first instances of something that was precognitive.
In his early 20s, Morton began publishing a newsletter. And on October 15th, 1993, he published his prediction that a catastrophic earthquake would strike Los Angeles. He set the time frame from December 23rd through January 7th, pinpointing Northridge as the epicenter. On January 17th, a powerful magnitude 6.8 earthquake struck Los Angeles, killing and injuring scores of residents.
So this is a second-story window.
Right now we're in the Northridge, Canoga Park area.
Morton missed the date by 10 days, but otherwise, his prediction held.
In a kind of a sick way, you're sort of elated because, something that you've foreseen has happened.
For this program, Morton gave an on-camera reading about the future.
I know.
With the aid of prayer and what he terms supernatural guidance, Morton enters a so-called astral plane, moving his hands over a map of the United States. Suddenly, he claims to sense premonitions, offering a timeline that covers the next 60 to 90 days.
Right up here up through Phoenix, through the center part of Arizona, and then into Colorado. So I see another series of great fires in this entire area. And then this whole area around Four Corners. I see ships, I see angelic beings, I see extraterrestrial entities, I see a wave of activity. The biggest thing I'm seeing is right around Washington, D.C. It looks like some kind of chemical attack or something around D.C. It looks like what appears to me an evacuation. This is very close.
Within weeks of Morton's reading, wildfires ravaged hundreds of thousands of acres in Colorado and Arizona in the summer of 2002. Some would say the fires are a regular occurrence, and that his other predictions clearly did not come to pass.
There's no such thing as ESP or telepathy or psychic power. When you try to do controlled research on it, these tests never come out anything other than chance events.
Despite this kind of criticism, Sean David Morton pushes on. Beset by dark visions he describes as not just a blessing, but a curse.
And all the terrible things that I see in the future, that the good guys win in the end, which I guess is the good news. Wow. Sorry. It's it's not so bad. I guess if I couldn't handle it, then the Creator wouldn't have picked me. But it's one of those things that who wants this job? I mean, if you're right, nobody likes you, and if you're wrong, nobody respects you.
Next, researchers put modern prophets to the test with startling results.
The Earth will be broken up in the western portion of America, and that will make for the eruption of volcanoes in the torrid areas. And there will be shifting then of the poles.
Each year around the world, self-styled psychics make countless predictions about what may happen in the days and years ahead. But how much of this prophecy is given serious scientific study? Experiments performed under rigorous controls with concrete data and verifiable results?
Science is not only now documenting those phenomena under controlled conditions in the laboratory, but they're also providing us with ways to understand from a scientific point of view how these kinds of things are possible.
Of all of America's psychics, none has been more famous than Edgar Cayce. Born in 1877, Cayce was a devout Christian who, as a boy, convinced his family of his unusual mental powers. A photographer by trade, he came to prominence in the early 20th century, when charismatic preachers spread their fire and brimstone evangelism across America.
Evangelist Amy Semple McPherson led 5,000 followers of her Foursquare.
He began as a self-styled healer, giving what he called life readings, advising his clients on every aspect of life. During his readings, which he dictated to a stenographer, Cayce's eyes fluttered, and he appeared to go into a trance. This soon earned him the nickname, the Sleeping Prophet. Reportedly, he psychically diagnosed hundreds of physical ailments each year, often by mail or over the telephone, without seeing the patient.
Much of what he predicted was, or much of what he offered people in terms of diagnosis and prescription was good American folk medicine. But much of it worked, and so he's to be credited for that.
At other readings, he would be overcome by what he saw. Cayce once fled from a room in sorrow when he saw that the three young men sitting there would not return from World War II.
Cayce basically is updating 18th century spiritualist mediums. The table knocking and the rapping and the seances, like a spiritual vaudeville. And he brings it together in a way that is very popular, very marketable, and is captivating.
Perhaps the most controversial aspect of Cayce's psychic ability manifested in 1923, when he became convinced that he'd lived past lives and was able to predict the future.
Dad's mind could move in time, could go back in time and see the past, could go up in the future and see all the future possibilities.
Danger in the bull market. The reserves of nations and of individuals will cause a great disturbance in financial circles.
According to Cayce's followers, he urged his friends to get out of the stock market 6 months before the calamitous 1929 crash.
Ye are to have a division in thine own land, before there is the second of presidents that next will not live through his office.
This Cayce prediction made in 1939 is interpreted by followers to have foreseen the deaths of Franklin Roosevelt and John Kennedy in office. Cayce was particularly obsessed with the lost continent of Atlantis, where he claimed to have lived during one of his past lives. According to myth, Atlantis had been mysteriously destroyed and sent to the bottom of the ocean in 10500 BC. From 1932 to 1944, Cayce mentioned Atlantis 700 times during readings. By far his most famous prediction was the discovery of the lost continent in the area of Bimini in the Bermuda Triangle, which he said would take place in 1968.
And there was great excitement when there were some rock formations found that on first glance looked an awful lot like man-made buildings and roadways, the like, but later proved to be purely natural formations. So Casey's prediction of Atlantis rising, it just didn't happen.
There has been no study done by outside experts that confirms the reliability of Casey's estimated 30,000 life readings. Many of his predictions for the future, such as California sinking into the Pacific or the calamitous shifting of the poles, never happen. Yet the sleeping prophet continues to have staunch supporters.
Edgar Cayce was not a freak, and he was not a fraud. He reveals capabilities that potentially all of us have to various degrees if we're just open to it.
Gary Schwartz, who holds a Harvard PhD in psychology, conducts psychic research at the University of Arizona at Tucson. A former skeptic of so-called paranormal, Schwartz now devotes his life to its validation.
When I was a professor at Yale, and I started learning about energy and information, and the theory of systemic memory came to me. The systemic memory hypothesis predicts that everything, from the micro, the tiniest atoms, to the largest galaxies, has what are called feedback loops. And energy and information circulates within these systems. It therefore remembers and evolves. It's just a question of us retrieving that information in order to be able to prophesize and see the future.
According to Schwartz, he's proven the existence of prophecy by his studies of renowned British psychic Christopher Robinson. Dubbed the Dream Detective by the British media, Robinson is a modern-day sleeping prophet. He claims to receive information about the future as he sleeps.
We've got a situation in the world where scientists believe one thing and religious people and everybody else believe something else.
In August of 2001, Dr. Schwartz invited Robinson to undergo testing of his prophetic abilities at the Tucson campus. Each day for 10 days, Schwartz took Robinson to a different location in southern Arizona, randomly selected and known only to Schwartz's research partner. Prior to setting out each day, Schwartz claims Robinson would record the images he had dreamt the night before. Robinson's dreams of mirrors, telescopes, and mountains accurately foretold a trip to Kitt Peak Observatory. As images of a lone propeller, small planes, and faded photographs accurately predicted a visit to a small airport diner.
Surprise doesn't convey the amount of amazement that I have by the accuracy of his dreams and the specificity of his dreams.
According to Schwartz, Robinson dreamt of specific location details on all 10 days of the experiment. But Schwartz tells of one more incident that, if true, seems even more profound. It happened on August 15, 2001, in the midst of the Tucson tests.
Christopher Robinson had a, quote, nightmare, and literally told me and other people at the hotel that he saw planes crashing into tall buildings in New York and thousands of people dying. And literally on the Sunday before 9/11, his dreams told him that it was going to be happening soon, and he contacted his police contacts in Scotland Yard, mailed a letter to the London Embassy, which of course got there too late.
The media was unaware of Robinson's prediction until after September 11th. Again, Schwartz offers no hard evidence, not a copy of the letter Robinson allegedly sent to the London Embassy, nor Robinson on tape discussing the dream.
He is in Washington right now doing an experiment with the Department of Defense, unofficially. People from various secret organizations within the government have called me to talk to me about this research.
The problem with the research, skeptics say, is a lack of rigorous scientific control and data.
We have people such as Gary Schwartz who say that the universe can carry imprints of the past that allow us to predict the future. Science requires not simply a correlation. When you examine a claim of something like imprinting the past on the fabric of the universe, whatever that means, that idea is either extremely vague and therefore difficult to verify experimentally.
Despite a sometimes disbelieving world, Dr. Schwartz remains undeterred.
And these people are profoundly skeptical. They believe that you're crazy to even entertain the hypothesis. It reminds me of the time during Copernicus, for example, when there were not only priests but scientists who refused to look through the telescopes to see what the new instruments were revealing.
When we return, visions of the future from indigenous people based on ominous warnings from Mother Earth. In ancient times, before science and rationality came to dominate thinking, it was customary to look to sages and seers for possible answers. Those with the gift of prophecy sought out sacred places, lakes, mountaintops, and secluded glades that seemed particularly conducive to telling the future. One such place was the Rock Temple at Delphi, considered the most sacred sanctuary of Greece, as well as the center of their ancient world. It was here that the oracles of Delphi, a secret society of virginal priestesses, served as psychic mediums for at least 12 centuries. Living in cloistered seclusion, the women were said to undergo an elaborate ritual, which included fasting, animal sacrifice, and the inhalation of mysterious vapors, all designed to induce a rapturous visionary state. The oracle was said to be the instrument of the gods, imparting divine guidance on everything from love to war to spiritual matters. For a fee, they met with politicians, warriors, scholars, and lovers seeking divine revelations about the future.
I think the important thing about Delphi is that these oracles at this temple were the last word. Everybody went there because it was widely understood that this was a source of sacred knowledge.
The most famous incident at Delphi was the king general who comes to Delphi and asks about a battle that's approaching, and the oracle responds, tomorrow a great king will fall, and he thinks it's his opponent. So he goes into battle, he's roundly defeated. The Delphi oracle was pretty famous for giving these kind of ambiguous answers that in the end they could be interpreted either way.
For centuries, scientists have speculated about the source of the rapturous trance states of the Delphi oracle. Many speculated the visions were induced by mysterious fumes emitted from fissures in the floor of the temple.
The question is, were the oracles at Delphi getting word from on high, or were they just getting high?
A recently discovered fault under the temple may have allowed naturally forming ethylene gas to rise to the surface, producing potent feelings of euphoria.
There's very much evidence that different kinds of drugs have been used throughout history to produce the altered states that then make the kind of prophecy and psychic experiences more likely to happen.
In Arizona, the sacred land of the Hopi Indian, another kind of seeing is taking place, linked by tradition and ritual dance to mythical Kachina spirits.
Kachinas, the beings that go between heaven and earth, that visit the Hopi people, this is where they reside.
Morning Sky, who holds a degree in religious studies from the University of Arizona, has dedicated his life to the exploration and preservation of indigenous prophecy.
In the old tradition, prophecy has to do with reading the patterns that are in the environment, the skies, etc.
One such prophecy made by ancient Aztec shamans foretold the coming of Quetzalcoatl, a bearded white god who would wisely rule over the Aztec. This shamanic prophecy came to pass in 1519, when Cortez and his conquistadors came to the Aztec Empire, and in a horrible ironic twist eventually slaughtered and enslaved the people. A Mayan prophecy warns of an equally dire future, in the year 2012, when the earth will endure an apocalyptic purification of the land. Ancient Hopi legend also speaks of cataclysmic earth changes. For the Hopi, ritual dance is the vehicle of prophecy.
The point of the dance is to generate the fire, the electromagnetic impulses, that cause sparks to fly, that cause the rocks to talk, that causes the volcano to move and the wind to blow.
Encoded within the sacred spaces of the earth lie the secrets of the future.
When we dance, we are challenging, tell me something. When I assume the guise of the bear, I am saying, come and talk to me. Talk to me as you would talk to the bear. And the eagles, the crows, the mountains, the wind, they come and they speak.
According to the Hopi, the earth gives a sobering forecast for the future. Mankind will not survive unless we change our ways now.
I think across the globe we are in a difficult time created by man. In other words, what appears to be impending wars, what appear to be droughts and famines, are generally caused because of mankind's interference with the natural ways of the planet. Hopi prophecy, Aborigine, Maori prophecy, Dogon, all say the same thing. We have to go back to the old ways, which basically says respect the environment, but also pay attention to what it is saying.
Linda! Once a doubter, Morning Sky now embraces the shaman tradition, seeking guidance he believes is imprinted in all things.
The difference between a shaman and a scientist is that a scientist can explain how it works. The shaman and the old ancient ones simply knew where the switch was. All you have to do is to go and flip the switch. That sparks that rock, that stone, that pyramid, that structure to release what has been imprinted on it so many thousands of years ago.
Next, psychic spies join the U.S. Army, attempting to see enemy attacks before they happen. They were called the most unlikely heirs of the ancient prophets. Their visions could mean life or death for thousands of soldiers, sailors, and Marines. Their employer? The United States Department of Defense.
I said, what we're doing is we are collecting intelligence against foreign threats using a parapsychological skill known as remote viewing. We want to know if you'd like to volunteer for the program. And I said, where do I sign? So
they were psychic soldiers, enlisted into top-secret programs that attempted to engage the enemy without ever leaving the room. Dale Graff was a civilian physicist employed by the government at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base in Ohio in the 1970s. After learning that the CIA had recently dropped a program investigating the military applications of psychic ability, Graff proposed a similar operation to the Department of Defense. The intelligence community knew that the Soviets were doing work in ESP, but little was known about the extent of their progress.
I began reading more and more about prophecy and about people that had prophetic dreams, and that sort of primed me for the discovery. I said, hey, there might be something to it. But I was still critical. I had to put it to the test, make sure that what we did was scientifically proper.
Graff's commanders gave him the go-ahead.
Everything worked out, and I became the first Department of Defense contract manager for remote viewing.
Remote viewing, a process in which the viewer enters a trance-like state and attempts to mentally access information from a distant source.
And if you look at it from the outside, you don't see much going on. You're just relaxing and occasionally drawing something. And we emphasize sketching and drawing, because if you start naming things, you may go wrong. You call a water tank when it's not that at all. It could be a part of a missile silo.
The concept was to focus mentally on military sources that might yield valuable information, including possible future attacks. Graff assembled a group of about 30 men and women, chosen for their creative and open minds, who worked together under the code name Operation Stargate. Each member of Operation Stargate had a unique style of remote viewing. Like many of the ancient seers, some went into a hypnagogic or trance-like state, while others preferred a conscious daydreaming technique.
Process used in the military was organized in the laboratory. It was developed around those things whereby you can connect the conscious and subconscious minds.
All of these techniques were incorporated into a modern-day prediction methodology.
We were involved in the invasion of Grenada. We were involved in doing spying on many leaders of foreign countries, as well as scientific developments, industrial developments, finding bugs in embassies, doing a lot of other work.
Paul Smith recalls an exercise in 1987 that haunts him to this day. It was Friday, May 15th. Smith, then an Army captain, put on heavy metal music to free his mind, as he'd done hundreds of times. But on this day, as he slipped into a trance-like state, the images he saw were dark, scary, and prophetic.
I got the impression of a large metallic structure moving through the water, and I realized it was a warship. And then I had a further impression of there's an aircraft some distance off. When it drops these two cylindrical objects with little short stubby wings on it, those objects and this vessel come together. And there's smoke and flame and people shouting, and I had the feeling of fire hoses on the deck. This aircraft was being directed by a group of folks, and they seemed to me to be Arabic.
Smith says that his superiors dismissed the premonition because an air attack on a U.S. military ship was considered virtually impossible at the time. 48 hours later, an Iraqi fighter jet fired a missile on the USS Stark, a Navy frigate stationed in the Persian Gulf. 38 American sailors were killed.
So it was kind of exciting to have succeeded, but the success was a little limited because we hadn't done anything about it, and we couldn't have done anything about it if we wanted to. I felt a little regret that we weren't able to do something with that information and save a few lives.
Participants in Operation Stargate interviewed for this program say they were rarely told what happened with their reports, which remain classified. Yet they insist they produced valuable results, even if they can't be verified.
Every single day through the Gulf War, we predicted the next day's activities and passed that up the line, to the proper people. Saddam Hussein didn't stand a chance.
For nearly 20 years, the Defense Department continued its remote viewing project without publicly acknowledging its existence. Then in 1995, Congress ordered an independent evaluation, which judged the program to be of little military value. Operation Stargate was disbanded. For physicist Dale Graff, it was the end of a research program that might have one day unlocked the secret to remote viewing. Today, with Buchanan and Smith, he teaches the process privately, believing in its value to gather information and forecast the future.
It's quite frankly a mystery, but we have to accept the evidence. We cannot say because it's not explained in physics, it doesn't exist.
The question of prophecy may not be answered in our lifetime. There's no question that skeptics raise valid questions about the credibility of self-styled psychics, and that many who claim these special powers fail the test of close scrutiny.
Extraordinary claims do require extraordinary evidence. The more significant a prediction is, the more significant a claim is, the stronger the evidence to back it up has got to be. It's as simple as that.
Yet to completely dismiss the possibility of clairvoyance and prophecy seems short-sighted.
In this time of terrorism, in this time of tumult, the sense of prophecy and insight and intuition can only help us.
Western science and just Western culture at large has voided out many of our very important mystical and intuitive experiences.
What we see with our eyes is only a tiny little sliver of all the energy that's around us.
We've taken a step, and then your daughters, our sons, are going to take the next step. I want my daughter someday to say, "Thank you, Dad. You got me one step closer to the future."